I was sitting in my own living room when my daughter Charlotte announced, "We found the perfect senior community for you, Mom." Sunset Manor has excellent reviews. My son Marcus nodded eagerly beside her, already pulling out brochures like they were presenting a vacation package, instead of shipping me off to die among strangers. That's when I realized they had no idea about the surprise I'd been planning with their college funds, the same funds they assumed would be their inheritance. Little did they know, those accounts were about to buy me a one-way ticket to Paris and the freedom I'd been dreaming of for 30 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. I was watering my orchids in the sunroom when I heard Charlotte's BMW pull into the driveway. She always drove that car like she was announcing her arrival to the entire neighborhood. Through the window, I watched her stride up the walkway in her designer suit, Marcus trailing behind her with that defeated expression he'd worn since his divorce last year. They both had keys to my house, a decision I was beginning to regret more each day. "Morning, Mom," Charlotte called out as she let herself in, not bothering to wait for me to answer the door. "We need to talk." At 73, I'd learned that when your adult children say they need to talk, it usually means they've already made decisions about your life without consulting you. I set down my watering can and smoothed my cardigan, preparing myself for whatever fresh interference they'd cooked up this time. Marcus shuffled in behind his sister, clutching a manila folder like it contained the secrets of the universe. My son had always been the gentler of my two children, but weak-willed in a way that made him easy prey for Charlotte's steamroller personality. Since his wife Linda had left him 6 months ago, taking half his assets and his confidence with her, he'd been even more susceptible to his sister's influence. "What's this about?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair, the one Harold had bought me for our 20th anniversary. The leather was worn soft now, molded to my body after years of evening reading sessions. Charlotte didn't sit. She never sat during these conversations, preferring to loom over me like a prosecutor addressing a particularly slow jury. "Mom, we're worried about you living alone in this big house. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" "I have my medical alert bracelet," I said, holding up my wrist. "And Mrs. Peterson next door checks on me every morning." "Mrs. Peterson is 85 herself," Marcus chimed in, finally finding his voice. "That's hardly a reliable safety net." I studied my children's faces, seeing not concern but calculation. Charlotte had that same expression she'd worn as a teenager when she wanted something expensive. Marcus looked guilty, which meant he'd been talked into something he wasn't entirely comfortable with. "We've been researching senior living communities," Charlotte continued, pulling out the brochures Marcus had been clutching. "Sunset Manor is absolutely beautiful. It has everything you could want: a fitness center, dining room service, organized activities, medical staff on site 24/7. She spread the glossy pamphlets across my coffee table like she was dealing cards. Smiling seniors playing chess, tending gardens, participating in what looked like the world's most enthusiastic book club. Everyone looked medicated into happiness. "I don't want to live in a community," I said quietly. "I want to live in my home." "But Mom, be reasonable," Charlotte said, her patience already wearing thin. "This house is way too much for you to maintain. The yard work alone." "I hire landscapers for the yard work. The heating bills in winter are astronomical. I can afford my heating bills. What about stairs? You're going up and down those stairs 20 times a day. All it takes is one fall." "Charlotte?" I held up my hand to stop her mid-sentence. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to give up my independence." Brother and sister exchanged a look that I'd seen before. It was the same look they'd shared when they'd convinced me to stop driving at night, then during bad weather, then altogether. The same look when they'd talked me into canceling my book club because the evening meetings were too late for someone my age. The same look when they'd insisted I needed a house cleaner because maintaining my home was too much work for a woman in her 70s. Each concession had been presented as being for my own good, my own safety, my own peace of mind. But I was beginning to see the pattern. They were dismantling my life piece by piece, decision by decision, until nothing would be left but whatever version of me they found convenient to manage. Mom, Marcus said gently, we've already put down a deposit. The words hit me like a physical blow. You did what? Just to hold the spot, Charlotte said quickly. The waiting list at Sunset Manor is months long. This was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. An opportunity for whom? My voice was rising now, though I tried to keep it steady. Did it occur to either of you to ask me what I wanted before putting down money on my behalf? We knew you'd resist the idea, Charlotte said, as if that justified everything. But sometimes family has to make difficult decisions for the people they love. For the people they love. The phrase sat bitter on my tongue. If this was love, it felt remarkably similar to being managed, like an inconvenient problem that needed solving. How much was this deposit? I asked. $5,000, Marcus mumbled, unable to meet my eyes. $5,000 of whose money? Well, technically it came from your account, Charlotte admitted. But we're co-signers, and you thought you'd spend my money on something I never agreed to. I stood up slowly, my arthritis making the movement more dramatic than I'd intended. You thought you'd make decisions about my life without consulting me. You thought you'd treat me like a child who can't be trusted with her own choices. That's not fair, Mom, Charlotte said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from her teenage years. We're trying to help you. We're trying to make sure you're safe and taken care of. No, Charlotte, you're trying to make sure I'm contained and manageable. The truth of my own words surprised me. I hadn't planned to be so direct, but something about their presumption, their casual dismissal of my autonomy, had awakened something fierce inside me. Maybe it was the same instinct that had gotten me through 47 years of marriage, 30 years of widowhood, and countless challenges they knew nothing about. We just want what's best for you, Marcus said weakly. What's best for me, or what's most convenient for you, I asked, because I notice neither of you has offered to have me live with you. Neither of you has suggested we hire more help so I can stay in my own home. The only solution you've presented is shipping me off to an institution where I'll be someone else's responsibility. Charlotte's face flushed. That's not true. We've thought about this very carefully. Have you? Have you thought about how I'll feel waking up in a strange place surrounded by strangers? Have you thought about what it will mean for me to lose my garden, my neighborhood, the home where I raised you both? Or did you just think about how much easier your lives will be when you don't have to worry about me anymore? The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the truth in their faces. The relief they felt at the prospect of having me safely tucked away where I couldn't be a burden or a worry or an inconvenience. The move-in date is next month, Charlotte said finally, her voice subdued. We thought it would be easier if we gave you time to adjust to the idea. Next month, 4 weeks to say goodbye to the life I'd built, the home I'd created, the independence I'd fought so hard to maintain. 4 weeks before I became just another.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Elderly woman warehoused away from the real world. I see. I picked up the brochures from my coffee table and handed them back to Marcus. Well, you certainly have given this a lot of thought. Something in my tone must have alarmed them because Charlotte suddenly looked uncertain. Mom, you understand this is for the best, right? You'll be happier there. You'll have people your own age to socialize with, activities to keep you busy. I understand perfectly, I said calmly. I understand that you've made a decision about my life without consulting me. I understand that you've spent my money on something I never wanted. And I understand that you expect me to be grateful for the privilege of being managed like an inconvenient piece of furniture. Mom, that's not. Marcus started. I think you should both leave now, I said. I need some time to process this generous gift you've given me. After they left, I sat in my empty house and let the full weight of their betrayal settle over me. This wasn't love or concern or family looking out for family. This was two middle-aged people solving a problem they decided I represented. Charlotte, at 45, was a successful real estate attorney who approached everything in life like a transaction to be optimized. She'd never married, claiming she was too focused on her career, but I suspected she was too focused on herself to share her life with anyone else. She lived in a spotless downtown condo that looked like a magazine spread and felt about as warm. Marcus, 2 years younger, had always been the more sensitive of my children. He'd been a devoted father to his 2 teenagers until Linda decided she needed to find herself with a yoga instructor 20 years younger. The divorce had crushed him financially and emotionally, leaving him desperate for stability and approval. Unfortunately, he seemed to think he could find both by agreeing with whatever Charlotte decided. Neither of them had asked about my dreams, my plans, my desires for my remaining years. They'd simply looked at my age and decided my life was essentially over, that my role now was to be safely maintained until I died. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. I walked to my desk in the study and pulled out a file folder I'd been keeping for the past 2 years. Inside were bank statements, investment records, and correspondence with my financial advisor that my children knew nothing about. Harold had been a meticulous saver and a shrewd investor, and in the 30 years since his death, I'd been equally careful with our money. The college funds they assumed would be their inheritance weren't inheritance at all. They were accounts I'd set up in my name only, funded by investments Harold and I had made specifically for our children's education. Both Charlotte and Marcus had received full funding for college and graduate school, as I'd promised. But what they didn't know was that those accounts had continued to grow, compounded by decades of careful investment and my own frugal living. The accounts now held just over $800,000. My children assumed this money would eventually be theirs because they'd never bothered to ask about the details of my financial arrangements. They'd never shown interest in my investments, my planning, or my independence. They saw an old woman in a big house and assumed I was living off Social Security, and whatever small savings Harold had left behind. They had no idea that I was wealthier than both of them combined. I opened my laptop and navigated to my banking website. The login credentials were saved, a small technical victory I was proud of. Despite my children's assumptions about my capabilities, I'd been managing my own finances electronically for years. $847,312. Enough to buy a very comfortable life anywhere I chose. Enough to fund any dream I'd been too responsible, too dutiful, too concerned with everyone else's needs to pursue. For the first time in months, I smiled. I'd always wanted to see Paris. The idea had been lurking in the back of my mind for years, ever since my friend Margaret had taken a river cruise through France and come back glowing with stories of sidewalk cafes, magnificent museums, and the simple pleasure of walking along the Seine at sunset. But responsible Eleanor Whitman didn't just pick up and move to Paris on a whim. Responsible Eleanor saved money for her children's futures, maintained her home for their inheritance, and lived carefully within predetermined boundaries. But maybe it was time for responsible Eleanor to retire. I spent the next week researching, planning, and making phone calls. It was remarkable how much could be accomplished when you had money and determination. I found a real estate agent who specialized in helping Americans purchase property in France. I researched visa requirements for retirees. I looked into international banking and currency exchange. Most importantly, I found an apartment. It was a 2-bedroom flat in the 7th arrondissement, just a 15-minute walk from the Eiffel Tower. The listing photos showed high ceilings, tall windows that flooded the rooms with light, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined courtyard. The furniture was included, elegant pieces that looked like they'd been selected by someone with exquisite taste and unlimited patience. The rent was €3,500 per month, which my financial advisor assured me was well within my means for the foreseeable future. The lease could be signed remotely with the first year paid in advance. I could be living in Paris within 6 weeks. The only remaining question was when to tell my children. I decided to wait until Charlotte called with more details about my imminent incarceration at Sunset Manor. She called exactly 1 week after their ambush, her voice bright with the kind of artificial enthusiasm people use when they're trying to sell you something you've already said you don't want. "Mom, I have wonderful news. I spoke with the director at Sunset Manor and they can move your check-in date up by 2 weeks. Isn't that exciting? You'll be all settled in before Thanksgiving." "How thoughtful of them," I said. "And how thoughtful of you to rearrange my life without consulting me." "Mom, please don't be dramatic. This is a good thing. You're going to love it there." "Charlotte, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Her voice sharpened with suspicion. "I won't be moving to Sunset Manor." "Mom, We've been through this. The deposit is non-refundable, and frankly, you don't have a choice in this matter. Actually, I do have a choice. And I've made it. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change everything. I'm moving to Paris. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Charlotte's voice came through, tight with disbelief. What did you just say? I said I'm moving to Paris. I've rented an apartment, arranged my visa, and hired movers. I leave in 3 weeks. That's ridiculous. You can't just move to Paris. You don't speak French, you don't know anyone there. You've never even been to Europe. All excellent reasons to go while I still can. Mom, this is insane. You're 73 years old. You can't just uproot your entire life and move to a foreign country. Why not? You were perfectly comfortable uprooting my entire life and moving me to a nursing home. That's different. Sunset Manor is a safe, controlled environment with medical support and Paris is a beautiful, vibrant city with culture and art and adventure. I know which one I prefer. I could hear Charlotte breathing heavily through the phone. When she spoke again, her voice had that dangerous edge that meant she was moving from persuasion to intimidation. Mom, be reasonable. How are you planning to pay for this fantasy? Do you have any idea how expensive it is to live in Paris? As a matter of fact, I do. I've done extensive research, and I can afford it quite comfortably. With what money? Your Social Security won't cover rent in Paris, and whatever small savings Dad left won't last long with international living expenses. This was the moment I'd been anticipating. The moment when I would finally show my children exactly how much they'd underestimated me. I'll be using the college funds. Another long silence. Then, what college funds? The accounts I set up to pay for your education. The ones that have been growing for the past 20 years. The ones that now contain just over $800,000. The sound Charlotte made was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. That money is supposed to be our inheritance. No, Charlotte. That money is mine. I earned it, I saved it, and I invested it. The fact that you assumed it would be yours someday doesn't make it yours. But we were counting on that money. Marcus needs it for his divorce settlement, and I have plans. You have plans for my money? How presumptuous of you. Mom, please, you can't do this. We're family. We love you. We just want what's best for you. If you loved me, you would have asked what I wanted instead of deciding what was convenient for you. If you wanted what was best for me, you would have supported my independence instead of trying to eliminate it. But Paris? Mom, you'll be completely alone in a foreign country. What if something happens to you? What if you get sick? What if you need help? Then I'll handle it the same way I've been handling everything else for the past 30 years, by myself, since you've both been too busy with your own lives to be much help anyway. The cruelty of my words surprised even me, but they were true. Charlotte visited once a month, usually to check on things that concerned her rather than to spend time with me. Marcus came by slightly more often, but our conversations rarely went beyond surface pleasantries. Neither of them had ever asked about my loneliness, my dreams, my fears, or my hopes. This is a mistake, Charlotte said, her voice now cold and clipped. A huge mistake that you're going to regret. Maybe. But it will be my mistake to make. Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't expect us to come running when this ridiculous adventure falls apart. I wouldn't dream of it, I said, and hung up. Marcus called an hour later, his voice shaky with panic. Mom, Charlotte told me about your Paris plan. Please tell me this is some kind of joke to get back at us for the Sunset Manor thing. It's not a joke, Marcus. I'm quite serious. But Mom, you can't just leave. What about your life here? What about us? What about my life here? You mean the life you and your sister were planning to dismantle piece by piece until nothing was left but a safely managed elderly woman in a nursing home. That's not fair. We were trying to help. Marcus, when was the last time you asked me what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what would make me happy? The silence told me everything I needed to know. I thought so, I continued gently. Sweetheart, I love you. I love you both. But I'm tired of being treated like a problem that needs solving. I'm tired of having my life managed by people who assume I'm no longer capable of making my own decisions. But Paris, Mom, it's so far away and so expensive. It's expensive, but I can afford it, and the distance might do us all some good. What if you hate it? What if you want to come home? Then I'll come home, but at least I'll have tried something beautiful and brave instead of spending my remaining years feeling like a burden. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small and hurt. Is that really how we made you feel? Like a burden? The pain in his question almost broke my resolve. Marcus had always been the more sensitive of my children, and I could hear the genuine distress in his voice. Oh, sweetheart, you didn't mean to, but yes, that's exactly how I've been feeling. Like an inconvenience you both feel obligated to manage. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted. Charlotte said it was the best thing for you, and I thought, Marcus, you're 43 years old. You don't have to agree with everything your sister says. I know, since the divorce, I've been so confused about everything. I thought, Charlotte knew what was best. Charlotte knows what's most convenient for Charlotte. That's not the same thing as what's best for anyone else. We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the end of the conversation, Marcus was crying. He apologized repeatedly, promised to support whatever I decided to do, and asked if he could visit me in Paris. I told him he was welcome any time, as long as he understood that I wasn't coming back to live in a nursing home. Charlotte, predictably, was less gracious. She called me 3 more times that week, each conversation more unpleasant than the last. She tried guilt, intimidation, and finally threats to have me declared mentally incompetent. I informed her that my financial advisor, my doctor, and my attorney would all testify to my mental acuity, and that any attempt to interfere with my plans would result in a very public legal battle she was unlikely to win. By the end of the second week, she'd stopped calling altogether. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I sold most of my furniture to an estate sale company, keeping only a few precious pieces that I arranged to have shipped to Paris. I gave away clothes, books, and household items to local charities. I closed local accounts and arranged for international banking services. The hardest part was saying goodbye to my home. Every room held memories of the life I'd built with Harold, the children I'd raised, the woman I'd been for so many decades. But as I walked through the empty rooms one last time, I realized I wasn't just leaving behind the past. I was finally making space for a future. My neighbor Mrs. Peterson cried when I told her I was leaving. She was the only person who seemed genuinely happy for my adventure, even as she mourned losing her morning coffee companion. Good for you, Eleanor, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I always thought you had more spirit than you let on. Harold would be proud of you for finally doing something just for yourself. The night before my departure, I sat in my empty living room surrounded by the 2 suitcases and 3 boxes that contained everything I was taking to my new life. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there. My phone rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Mom? I just wanted to call and wish you luck tomorrow. Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. I've been thinking about what you said, about not asking what you wanted. I realize I never really knew what made you happy. I'm not sure I knew either, until recently. Are you scared? I considered his question honestly. Terrified, I admitted, but also more excited than I've been in decades. I'm proud of you, Mom. I know I didn't handle things well with the Sunset Manor situation, but I'm proud of you for choosing something brave. It's never too late to choose something brave, Marcus. Remember that? After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my old life and imagined the brightness of my new one. Tomorrow I would board a plane to Paris, carrying nothing but my courage and my dreams, and enough money to turn those dreams into reality. My children had tried to put me in a box, literally and figuratively. They'd seen an old woman and assumed she was ready to be stored away safely until she died. They'd forgotten that I was still Eleanor Whitman, the same woman who'd raised 2 children as a single mother after Harold's death, who'd built a successful career as a high school English teacher, who'd managed investments and property and 1,000 daily challenges for 3 decades on her own. They'd forgotten that I was still capable of surprising them. Tomorrow I would begin the greatest surprise of all. Paris was waiting. The flight to Paris felt like the longest and shortest journey of my life. 13 hours suspended between the woman I had been and the woman I was choosing to become. I sat in business class, a luxury I'd never allowed myself before, watching the Atlantic Ocean spread endlessly beneath us. The elderly man beside me struck up a conversation about his grandson's wedding in Lyon, and for the first time in months I found myself talking to someone who didn't treat me like a problem requiring management. "First time in France?" he asked, noting my obvious excitement as I peered out the window. "First time anywhere, really," I admitted. "I'm starting over at 73. He smiled with the kind of warmth I'd forgotten strangers could offer. "Magnifique. France is perfect for new beginnings. The French understand that life is meant to be savored, not simply endured." His words settled into my heart like a benediction. Life meant to be savored, not simply endured. How long had I been merely enduring? How many years had I spent managing other people's expectations instead of pursuing my own joy? Charles de Gaulle Airport overwhelmed me with its size and international chaos, but I navigated it with surprising confidence. Maybe it was the adrenaline of adventure, or maybe it was the liberation of finally making decisions based on my own desires rather than other people's comfort. Whatever it was, I felt more alive than I had in years. The taxi driver who took me into the city spoke broken English, mixed with enthusiastic French, pointing out landmarks as we drove through streets that looked exactly like the postcards I'd collected but never thought I'd see in person. The Arc de Triomphe, the Champs-Élysées, the elegant Haussmannian buildings with their wrought iron balconies and cream-colored facades. Everything felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, like stepping into a dream I'd been having for decades without realizing it. My apartment building stood on a quiet street lined with plane trees, their branches creating a canopy of green shade over the sidewalk. The building's facade was classic Parisian architecture, with tall windows and decorative stonework that spoke of elegance and permanence. The concierge, Madame Dubois, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon and the kind of effortless style that made American women feel hopelessly unsophisticated. "Madame Whitman, bienvenue," she said, her English careful but warm. "Your apartment, it is ready. Very beautiful, tout la belle." She led me up 2 flights of stairs, my legs protesting slightly after the long flight, but my spirits soaring with each step. When she opened the door to apartment 3B, I gasped audibly. The photos had been beautiful, but reality was transcendent. Light poured through tall windows that opened onto a small balcony overlooking a courtyard garden. The ceilings were at least 12 feet high, painted white and crossed with exposed wooden beams that spoke of centuries of history. The furnishings were exactly as advertised, elegant and comfortable, chosen by someone who understood that a home should be both beautiful and livable. The kitchen was compact but perfectly appointed, with marble counters and copper pots hanging from hooks like pieces of art. The bedroom was serene, with a bed large enough for dreams and an armoire that looked like it had been crafted by artisans who took pride in their work. But it was the living room that made me feel like I'd stepped into a fairy tale, with its Persian rugs, velvet sofa, the color of sapphires, and walls lined with books in multiple languages. The previous tenant, she was professor at the Sorbonne, Madame Dubois explained, noticing my fascination with the bookshelves. Very cultured woman. She left many books for the next resident. Perhaps you will enjoy them. I ran my fingers along the spines, seeing titles in French, English, and what looked like Italian. Books on art history, philosophy, poetry, and travel. A lifetime of learning and curiosity left behind for the next dreamer to discover. "It's perfect," I whispered, meaning it completely. "Oui, it is special place," Madame Dubois agreed. "The quarter, it is very safe, very quiet. Many cafes, shops, the market on Wednesdays and Saturdays. You will be very comfortable here, I think." After she left, I stood alone in my Parisian apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the resigned peace of accepting limitation, but the joyful peace of being exactly where I belonged. I unpacked my 2 suitcases, hanging my clothes in the beautiful armoire and placing my few personal items around the apartment. The silver-framed photo of Harold and me on our wedding day went on the bedroom dresser. The small painting I'd bought from a local artist in my hometown found a spot on the kitchen wall. My mother's jewelry box, the only thing of hers I'd kept, claimed space on the living room bookshelf. With each item I placed, the apartment became less of a rental property and more of a home. My home. The first space in decades that belonged entirely to me, arranged according to my preferences, decorated with my choices, filled with my dreams. That evening I walked to a small cafe 2 blocks away and ordered dinner in my rudimentary French. The waiter was patient with my pronunciation and seemed genuinely pleased when I managed to communicate my desire for the coq au vin and a glass of red wine. I sat at a small table on the sidewalk, watching Parisians hurry past on their way home from work, and felt like an anthropologist discovering a fascinating new culture. The couple at the next table was having an animated discussion about art, their hands moving expressively as they debated the merits of various painters. An elderly man walked by with a small dog wearing a hand-knitted sweater, stopping to greet the cafe owner like an old friend. A woman my age sat alone at another table, reading a book and sipping wine with the kind of contentment that suggested she was exactly where she wanted to be. This, I realized, was what I'd been missing. Not just the beauty of Paris, but the simple pleasure of being anonymous, of existing in a space where no one expected anything from me except payment for my dinner. No one here knew I was supposed to be in a nursing home. No one was monitoring my choices or questioning my capabilities. I was just Eleanor, a woman having dinner alone in Paris, and that felt like the most delicious freedom imaginable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Hope your flight was safe, Mom. Thinking of you." I smiled and typed back, "Safe and happy. Paris is magical." He responded immediately, "I'm so glad. Send pictures when you can." Charlotte hadn't contacted me since our final phone call, and I found I didn't miss her silence at all. The next few days passed in a blur of exploration and wonder. I walked for hours, getting lost in neighborhoods with names I couldn't pronounce but couldn't forget. I discovered a patisserie that made croissants so perfect they seemed like edible art. I found a small market where vendors spoke to me in patient French and seemed delighted when I successfully purchased cheese and bread and wine. Most importantly, I began to remember who I was beneath decades of duty and sacrifice. I had forgotten that I loved art, that I found joy in wandering through museums and galleries, that I had opinions about beauty and meaning that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. The Musée d'Orsay became my first regular destination. I spent entire afternoons wandering through rooms filled with Impressionist masterpieces, sitting on benches and letting the colors and light wash over me like a form of therapy. I'd studied these paintings in books during my teaching years, but seeing them in person was like meeting celebrities I'd only known through photographs. In front of Renoir's Luncheon of the Boating Party, I found myself crying. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of finally being present in my own life. The painting showed people gathered around a table, enjoying food and wine and each other's company in golden afternoon light. It was a celebration of simple pleasures, of being fully alive in the moment, and I realized I'd spent decades postponing that kind of joy. "Émouvant, non?" said a voice beside me. I turned to find a woman about my age, elegantly dressed in the way that seemed effortless for French women of a certain generation. Her silver hair was cut in a chic bob, and her dark eyes held the kind of intelligence that came from a lifetime of curiosity. "I'm sorry, I don't speak much French," I said, wiping away my tears. "Ah, American," she said, switching to accented but fluent English. "I said it is moving, yes? This painting, it makes many people cry." "It's so beautiful," I managed. "So full of life and joy." "Oui, exactement." Renoir, he understood that happiness is not a luxury, but a necessity. Like bread or water, we must have it to truly live. She introduced herself as Celeste Moreau, a retired literature professor who spent her days wandering through museums and cafes, reading and thinking and enjoying what she called the luxury of time without obligations. "You are new to Paris?" she asked as we walked together through the next gallery. "Very new. I just arrived 3 days ago." "And you come alone?" How brave. I found myself telling her the story, or at least an abbreviated version. How my children had tried to put me in a nursing home, how I'd used my savings to escape to Paris instead, how I was discovering that starting over at 73 felt less like ending and more like beginning. Celeste listened with the kind of attention that had become rare in my life, asking thoughtful questions and making observations that showed she understood not just what I was saying, but what I was feeling. "Your children, they see the number 73 and think the story is almost finished," she said as we paused in front of a Monet water lily painting. "But we know better, non? The story, it is just changing chapters." "Exactly," I said, feeling understood in a way I hadn't experienced in years. "I have an idea," Celeste continued. "Tomorrow is Saturday, and there is a wonderful market near my apartment. Would you like to come with me? I can teach you how to shop like a Parisienne, and afterward we can have lunch at my favorite bistro." I accepted eagerly, realizing that I'd just made my first French friend. The next morning, Celeste met me at the Marché des Enfants Rouges, the oldest covered market in Paris. She guided me through stalls, selling everything from perfect vegetables to aromatic spices to flowers that looked like they'd been painted by the impressionists we'd admired the day before. "The secret," she explained as we selected tomatoes, "is to shop with your senses, not just your eyes. Smell the fruit, feel the vegetables, listen to what the vendors tell you about their products. Shopping here is not just buying food, it is connecting with the people who grow it and the tradition of eating well." I watched her interact with the vendors, chatting in rapid French about the weather, their families, the quality of the seasonal produce. They clearly knew her well and respected her opinions. When she introduced me as her American friend, they welcomed me with the same warmth, speaking slowly and clearly so I could practice my French. By the end of our shopping expedition, I had enough ingredients to cook for a week and enough confidence to return on my own. More importantly, I had a model for how to live in Paris, not as a tourist, but as a temporary resident building genuine connections with the community around me. Lunch at Celeste's favorite bistro extended into the afternoon as we talked about books, art, travel, and the particular freedom that came with being women of a certain age, who no longer felt obligated to apologize for taking up space in the world. "When I was younger," Celeste said, "I thought I needed permission to enjoy life. Permission from my parents, my husband, my children, society. Now I understand that the only permission I need is my own." "How did you learn that?" I asked. "The same way you are learning it now. By taking risks, by choosing joy over safety, by remembering that we are the authors of our own stories." That evening I cooked dinner in my Parisian kitchen for the first time, using the ingredients Celeste had helped me select. I opened a bottle of wine, put on French music I'd discovered on the radio, and prepared a simple meal of roasted chicken with herbs, fresh vegetables, and bread from the bakery down the street. As I sat at my small dining table looking out at the courtyard garden where evening light filtered through green leaves, I felt a contentment so profound it was almost physical. This was what I'd been seeking without knowing it. Not luxury or adventure for their own sake, but the simple pleasure of creating a life that reflected my own choices and values. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see Charlotte's name on the screen. I debated whether to answer, but curiosity won. "Hello, Charlotte." "Mom." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I wanted to check in and see how your experiment is going." "It's going beautifully. Thank you for asking. Are you eating enough, getting proper nutrition? Do you have access to medical care if you need it?" I smiled at the transparent attempt to find problems with my choice. "I'm eating wonderfully. The food here is incredible and I've never felt healthier. As for medical care, France has one of the best healthcare systems in the world. What about language barriers, social isolation, safety concerns?" I'm learning French, I've made a friend, and I feel completely safe. A pause. Then, Mom, I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I realize I may have been overly focused on practical concerns. This was the closest Charlotte had ever come to an apology, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe our relationship could evolve along with my circumstances. I appreciate that, sweetheart, but I still think this whole Paris adventure is impractical. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere closer to family? Somewhere we could visit more easily? And there it was. Even her attempt at reconciliation was really about her convenience, not my happiness. Charlotte, I'm happier than I've been in years. I'm learning new things, meeting new people, experiencing beauty on a daily basis. Why would I give that up to make visiting easier for people who never visited me very often anyway? Another pause. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you visited me just to spend time together? Not to check on the house, not to discuss my finances or my health, but just because you enjoyed my company. Silence. I thought so, I said gently. Charlotte, I love you, but I'm not going to apologize for choosing a life that brings me joy, just because it's inconvenient for you. Fine, she said, her voice returning to its familiar coldness. But don't expect us to rescue you when this fantasy falls apart. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied, and meant it. After we hung up, I sat in my beautiful apartment and realized that Charlotte's call hadn't upset me the way similar conversations had in the past. Her disapproval felt distant and irrelevant, like criticism from someone whose opinion I no longer valued. This was perhaps the most unexpected gift of my Parisian adventure. Not just the joy of new experiences, but the freedom from old patterns. I was no longer the mother who absorbed her children's moods and made their comfort my responsibility. I was Eleanor, a woman living her own life according to her own priorities. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both exotic and natural. I developed routines that were entirely my own, shaped by pleasure rather than obligation. Morning coffee and croissants at the cafe around the corner, where the owner now greeted me by name. Afternoon walks through different neighborhoods, each one revealing new treasures. Evening meals either cooked in my own kitchen or enjoyed at small restaurants where I was slowly becoming a regular customer. I signed up for French classes at the local community center, where I was the oldest student by at least a decade, but certainly not the least enthusiastic. My classmates were mostly young professionals and university students, but they welcomed me with the kind of easy acceptance that made me feel like age was just another interesting characteristic, not a limiting factor. My teacher, Madame Laurent, was a patient woman in her 40s who seemed genuinely delighted by my determination to learn. After class one day, she approached me with a suggestion. Madam Whitman, you have very good instincts for the language. Have you considered joining our conversation group? It meets Saturday mornings at the cafe near the Pantheon. It would be excellent practice for you. I joined the conversation group the following Saturday and found myself in a circle of 8 people from 6 different countries, all united by our desire to improve our French and our willingness to make mistakes in public. There was Maria from Spain, working as an au pair, Ahmed from Morocco, studying engineering, Jennifer from Australia, here on a year-long fellowship, and others whose stories gradually emerged as we struggled together through discussions about everything from French cinema to environmental policy. What struck me most was how no one seemed to find it unusual that a 73-year-old American woman was sitting among them, fumbling through conversations about Truffaut films and French politics. Age seemed irrelevant in this context. We were all foreigners, all learners, all people who had chosen to step outside our comfort zones in pursuit of growth. Eleanor, what brought you to France? Asked Pierre, a young man from Quebec who was doing research at the Sorbonne. I found myself telling the story again, but this time it felt less like a confession and more like an adventure tale. The nursing home plot, the escape to Paris, the discovery that starting over could feel like coming home. Incroyable, said Maria. You are inspiration for all of us. If you can change your life at 73, we have no excuses for not taking risks while we are young. The young are not the only ones who can take risks, I replied in my careful French. Sometimes the old have less to lose and more courage. That comment sparked a discussion about age and risk-taking that continued long after our official session ended. As we lingered over coffee, I realized that for the first time in decades, I was part of a community where my ideas and experiences were valued, not despite my age, but because of the perspective that age provided. Walking home through the Latin Quarter that afternoon, I passed a small gallery with a sign advertising an exhibition called Nouveau Départ, New Beginning. The paintings in the window were by various artists, but they all seemed to explore themes of transformation and renewal. One piece in particular caught my attention, a painting of a woman standing at the edge of the sea, her back to the viewer, arms outstretched toward the horizon. I stood looking at it for a long time, seeing myself in that anonymous figure. The woman could have been any age, from any background, but her posture spoke of hope and possibility, and the courage to embrace an uncertain future. On impulse, I went into the gallery. The owner was a sophisticated woman in her 50s who spoke excellent English and seemed genuinely interested in discussing the artwork with visitors rather than simply making sales. "You are drawn to that piece, yes?" she asked, noticing my fascination with the painting in the window. "It speaks to me," I admitted. The sense of standing at the beginning of something new. "Ah, you understand the artist's intention perfectly. She painted this series after her own major life change. Divorce, new city, new career at age 60. She says these paintings are about the moment when you stop looking back and start looking forward." I learned that the artist, Catherine Dubois, no relation to my concierge, was having a small reception at the gallery the following evening. Would I like to attend? I said yes without hesitation, realizing that the Eleanor, who had lived in suburban Virginia, would never have attended an art opening alone in a foreign country. But Parisian Eleanor was apparently much braver. The reception was intimate. Maybe 30 people wandering through the small gallery with glasses of wine and animated conversations about art and life, and the courage required for both. Catherine Dubois turned out to be a woman with wild gray hair and paint-stained fingers, who radiated the kind of creative energy I'd forgotten was possible. When I complimented her on the painting that had drawn me into the gallery, her eyes lit up with pleasure. "Merci, you are very kind. That painting, it is special to me because it captures the moment I decided to stop being afraid of my own life." "What do you mean?" I asked. "For so many years, I lived according to other people's expectations. Good wife, good mother, good teacher. But I forgot to be good to myself, to honor my own dreams and desires. The painting, it is about the moment I remembered that my life belongs to me." We talked for almost an hour about art, about risk-taking, about the particular freedom that comes with age, and the wisdom that we have less time to waste on other people's limitations. "You are artist yourself?" she asked. "Oh no, not at all. I was a high school English teacher." "Ah, but teaching is art form, non? And now, what do you create?" The question caught me off guard. What was I creating? "I suppose I'm creating a new life," I said slowly. "Exactement. The most important art of all." By the time I left the gallery, I had purchased the painting that had first caught my attention and made plans to have coffee with Catherine the following week. I was also carrying something more valuable, the idea that reinvention could be a creative act, that starting over was its own form of artistic expression. That night, I hung the painting in my bedroom where I would see it first thing every morning. The woman with her arms outstretched to the sea would remind me daily that I had chosen hope over fear, possibility over safety, growth over stagnation. Marcus called the next morning, his voice excited and proud. "Mom, I saw the photos you posted on Facebook. Your apartment looks incredible, and you look so happy. I'm genuinely thrilled for you." Facebook had been another small victory. I'd finally learned to post photos and updates, sharing glimpses of my Parisian life with friends back home who responded with a mixture of amazement and envy. "Thank you, sweetheart. It feels incredible too." "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing something brave. Linda and I are going to try counseling." This was unexpected news. Marcus and Linda had been divorced for months, and I'd assumed that chapter of his life was closed. "That's wonderful, Marcus. I hope it works out." We realized that we gave up too easily, that we let other people's opinions influence our decisions too much. Sound familiar? I smiled, hearing echoes of my own journey in his words. Very familiar. I want to visit you, Mom. Not to check on you or convince you to come home, but just to see this new life you've created. Would that be okay? I would love that more than anything. After we hung up, I sat in my sun-filled living room and marveled at the unexpected ways my choice to move to Paris was rippling through my family. By refusing to be managed and controlled, by insisting on my right to pursue my own happiness, I had apparently given Marcus permission to examine his own life more honestly. Change, it seemed, was contagious. The thought reminded me of something Celeste had said during one of our museum visits. When we live authentically, we give others permission to do the same. Maybe that was the real gift of this Parisian adventure. Not just my own happiness, but the example I was setting for anyone who thought it was too late to start over, too late to take risks, too late to choose joy over obligation. I was 73 years old, and I was just getting started. 3 months into my Parisian life, I woke to find snow dusting the courtyard garden outside my bedroom window. The plane trees stood bare against a pewter sky, their branches etched in white like delicate calligraphy. Winter in Paris was proving to be a different kind of magic than the golden autumn that had welcomed my arrival, but no less enchanting. I wrapped myself in the cashmere robe I'd bought at Galeries Lafayette, another small luxury I'd never permitted myself in my previous life, and made coffee in my little kitchen. The ritual had become sacred to me, these quiet morning moments when the city was just beginning to stir, and I could savor the profound contentment of being exactly where I belonged. My French had improved dramatically. Conversations that had once required careful preparation and constant translation now flowed with increasing naturalness. Madame Dubois and I chatted easily about everything from the weather to politics when I collected my mail. The vendors at the market greeted me like an old friend, asking about my health and recommending seasonal specialties with the warmth of genuine affection. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I saw myself. The woman who looked back at me from mirrors no longer appeared diminished by age or burdened by obligation. She looked alive, curious, purposeful. The silver in her hair caught light like spun silk, and her eyes held the bright intelligence of someone actively engaged with the world around her. My friendship with Celeste had deepened into something precious and sustaining. We met for coffee twice a week, visited museums together, and had developed an easy intimacy that reminded me how much I'd missed having a true confidant. She was helping me understand not just French culture, but the art of living well as an older woman in a society that valued wisdom and experience. Catherine Dubois had become another important presence in my new life. The artist had taken me under her wing, introducing me to her circle of creative friends and even convincing me to try my hand at watercolor painting. My attempts were laughably amateur, but Catherine insisted that artistic skill was less important than artistic courage. "You are already master of the most difficult art," she told me as I struggled with a painting of the Seine at sunset. "The art of recreating yourself. Everything else is just technique." It was Catherine who suggested I consider writing about my experience. She'd noticed that I had a gift for storytelling, particularly when I described my old life in Virginia compared to my new reality in Paris. "You have lived 2 completely different lives," she said. "That perspective, it is rare and valuable. Perhaps other women need to hear that starting over is possible." The idea intrigued me. I'd always loved language, both as a teacher and as a reader, but I'd never considered myself a writer. Yet as I began to jot down memories and observations, I discovered that words came easily when I was writing about something that mattered deeply to me. I started small, with short pieces about daily life in Paris, the ritual of buying bread from my neighborhood boulangerie, the pleasure of discovering a new café tucked away on a side street, the satisfaction of successfully navigating a complex conversation entirely in French. Gradually, these observations grew into longer reflections about age, independence, family relationships, and the courage required to choose authentic happiness over comfortable misery. Writing became another form of morning meditation, a way of processing not just my current experiences, but my entire journey to this point. I wrote about Harold, about the early years of our marriage when I dreamed of travel and adventure before settling into the comfortable routines of suburban life. I wrote about raising children while managing my own career, about the gradual way my identity had narrowed, from Eleanor the individual to Eleanor the mother and wife. Most importantly, I wrote about the moment I'd realized that my children's vision of my future had nothing to do with my own dreams, and how that realization had finally given me permission to claim my life as my own. Marcus visited in December, arriving with his coat collar turned up against the Parisian winter, and his eyes wide with amazement at the city's beauty. I met him at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and the moment I saw him walking through the arrivals gate, I realized how much both of us had changed in the months since I'd left Virginia. He looked healthier, more confident, less burdened by the defeated energy that had surrounded him since his divorce. And when he saw me, his face broke into a smile of pure joy. "Mom, you look incredible," he said, wrapping me in a hug that felt different from the obligatory embraces we'd shared in the past. This felt genuine, enthusiastic, proud. "You look pretty wonderful yourself," I replied, meaning it completely. The taxi ride into the city gave us our first real conversation in months. Marcus told me about his counseling sessions with Linda, about the work they were doing to rebuild not just their marriage but their individual sense of purpose and identity. "We realized we'd been living according to other people's expectations too," he said, echoing the themes that had driven my own transformation. "Linda's parents wanted her to be a certain kind of wife and mother. My expectations were shaped by watching you and Dad, but I never asked what she actually wanted." "And what does she want?" I asked. "To go back to school." "She has a degree in social work, but she gave up her career when the kids were born. Now she wants to pursue a master's degree in family therapy." I felt a surge of pride in my daughter-in-law, whom I'd perhaps judged too harshly for her role in Marcus's post-divorce depression. "That sounds wonderful. And you're supportive?" "Completely. It turns out that supporting someone's dreams is much more satisfying than trying to limit them for your own comfort." The comment hung in the air between us, and I knew we were both thinking about his participation in Charlotte's plan to ship me off to Sunset Manor. "Marcus," I said gently, "I want you to know that I've forgiven both you and Charlotte for what happened. I understand you thought you were acting in my best interests." "No, Mom, we were acting in our own interests. We wanted you safely managed, so we wouldn't have to worry about you or feel guilty about not being more involved in your life." His honesty took my breath away. "I appreciate you saying that. I needed to say it, and I needed to see this." He gestured out the taxi window at the elegant streets of Paris rolling past us. "I needed to see what courage actually looks like." I showed him my apartment with the pride of someone who had created something beautiful from nothing but vision and determination. He wandered through the rooms, touching the books, admiring the artwork, standing on the balcony despite the December cold to look out at the courtyard garden below. "This feels like you," he said finally. "Not the you I thought I knew, but the you that was maybe always there, underneath all the responsibility and sacrifice." That evening, I took him to dinner at my favorite bistro, where the staff greeted me like family and insisted on bringing extra courses to welcome my son to their establishment. Marcus watched in amazement as I conversed easily with the waiter in French, ordered wine with confidence, and moved through the social rituals of Parisian dining with apparent expertise. "When did you become this person?" he asked over dessert. "I think I've always been this person," I replied. "I just forgot for a while." We spent the next week exploring Paris together, but more importantly, we spent it getting to know each other as adults rather than as mother and child, trapped in outdated roles. Marcus met Celeste and Catherine, joined me for French conversation group, and attended a small dinner party at the apartment of one of my new friends. At the dinner party, I watched him interact with my Parisian circle, and realized that he was seeing me not as his aging mother who needed protection, but as Eleanor, a woman who had built an interesting life filled with interesting people. The shift in his perception was palpable, and I could see it changing the way he thought about his own possibilities. "I've been thinking about something," he said on his last night in Paris as we sat in my living room with glasses of wine and the comfortable intimacy of people who had finally learned to see each other clearly. "What's that?" "Linda and I want to take a sabbatical year. Her grad school program has a study abroad option, and there are opportunities for me to work remotely. We're thinking about spending a year in Europe, maybe splitting time between London and somewhere else." "That sounds amazing," I said, feeling genuinely thrilled for them. We want to bring the kids. We want them to see that life doesn't have to follow a predetermined script, that taking risks and pursuing dreams is normal and healthy. They'll love it, I assured him. And you'll love being the kind of parents who show their children that adventure is possible. We learned that from you, Mom. You've shown all of us that it's never too late to choose a different story. The night before Marcus left, Charlotte called. I hadn't spoken to her since our tense conversation months earlier, and I was surprised to see her name on my phone. Mom, she said, her voice lacking its usual edge of irritation. Marcus told me about his visit to Paris. He says you seem incredibly happy. I am, I said simply. He also said you've forgiven us for the nursing home situation. I have. I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I realize how awful we were to you. How dismissive and controlling. This was perhaps the first genuine apology I'd ever received from Charlotte, and it caught me off guard. Thank you for saying that. I want to understand something. Were you really unhappy living near us? Did we really make you feel like a burden? I considered her question carefully, wanting to be honest without being cruel. Charlotte, I don't think you intended to make me feel like a burden. But yes, I was unhappy. I felt like my role in your life was to be conveniently available when you needed something, and safely invisible when you didn't. That's horrible, she said quietly. It wasn't entirely your fault. I allowed it to happen because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, eventually I'd earn the kind of relationship I wanted with you both. And now I understand that love isn't something you earn through sacrifice. It's something you give and receive freely, or not at all. There was a long pause. Then Charlotte said something that surprised me more than anything else in our conversation. I want to visit you. I want to see this life you've built, and try to understand who you really are when you're not being my mother. I would like that very much, I said, meaning it. Would next month work? I can take some vacation time. February in Paris is beautiful, I told her. I'll be here. After we hung up, Marcus looked at me with amazement. I've never heard Charlotte sound so vulnerable, so genuine. Maybe she just needed to see that I wasn't going to disappear if she stopped trying to control me. Or maybe she's finally ready to grow up, he said with a rueful smile. Marcus left the next morning with promises to return soon, and plans for that European sabbatical year. As his taxi pulled away from my building, I felt none of the sadness I'd expected. Instead, I felt proud and hopeful. Proud of the man my son was becoming, and hopeful about the relationship we were building, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. That afternoon, I met Celeste for our usual coffee, and I told her about Charlotte's call and planned visit. Magnifique, she said with satisfaction. You see, when we stop trying to earn love through diminishment of ourselves, we teach others to love us properly. I hope that's what's happening, I said. Trust me, Cherie. I have seen this transformation in my own family. When I stopped accepting scraps of attention and started living fully, my children had to decide whether they wanted a real relationship with me or no relationship at all. Most chose real, and the ones who didn't. Their loss, she said with Gallic pragmatism. We cannot force people to love us well, but we can insist on being treated with respect. Winter in Paris deepened into the kind of gray beauty that made me understand why the Impressionists had been so fascinated by light and shadow. I developed new routines, suited to the shorter days and colder weather. Long afternoons in cafes with books and notebooks. Evening cooking sessions that filled my apartment with warmth and wonderful smells. Weekend trips to museums and galleries that were less crowded in the off-season. I also began to write more seriously, turning my scattered observations and memories into something that resembled a coherent narrative. Catherine had introduced me to a small writing group that met monthly in a bookstore near the Sorbonne, and I'd begun sharing pieces of my story with other writers who offered both encouragement and honest feedback. You have found your voice, said Henri, a retired journalist who had become something of a mentor to our little group. It is authentic, unpretentious, full of wisdom earned through experience. You must continue. The idea of writing a book about my experience had gone from impossible dream to realistic goal. I was discovering that I had more to say than I'd realized. Not just about my own transformation, but about the broader questions of aging, independence, family relationships, and the courage required to live authentically at any stage of life. My days had developed a rhythm that felt both structured and spontaneous. Morning writing sessions at my kitchen table overlooking the courtyard. Afternoon adventures through Paris, sometimes planned, sometimes completely random. Evening meals either cooked at home or shared with friends at restaurants that had become extensions of my social circle. The loneliness that had haunted my last years in Virginia seemed like a distant memory. Not because I was never alone, but because being alone no longer felt like abandonment. Solitude had become a choice rather than a circumstance, and that made all the difference. Charlotte arrived on a gray February afternoon, looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. She stood in my doorway, clutching her suitcase handle with white knuckles, clearly nervous about what she might find. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, embracing her with genuine warmth. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was small, almost childlike. I helped her with her luggage and gave her the tour of my apartment, watching her face carefully for reactions. She moved through the room slowly, taking in the artwork, the books, the evidence of a life that was clearly full and purposeful. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "And it feels like you. Like the real you. Thank you. That means a lot." "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small wrapped package. I opened it to find a silver bracelet engraved with a simple phrase, "Courage is grace under pressure." "It's a Hemingway quote," she explained. "I saw it and thought of you, of what you did, leaving everything behind and starting over here." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and what it represented. "It's perfect. Thank you." The next few days were unlike any time Charlotte and I had ever spent together. Instead of the usual dynamic where I catered to her needs and preferences, we existed as two adults, sharing experiences and discovering each other as individuals. I introduced her to my friends, took her to my favorite places, and let her see the life I'd built without apology or explanation. She met Celeste, who charmed her completely with stories of her own late-in-life adventures. She attended my writing group, where she listened with apparent fascination as I read a piece about the moment I decided to leave Virginia. Most importantly, we talked. Really talked, perhaps for the first time in decades. "I need to tell you something," Charlotte said on her third night, as we sat in my living room after dinner. "The nursing home thing wasn't really about your safety or your health." "I know," I said gently. "It was about my fear of losing control. And my guilt about not being a better daughter." "Charlotte, no, let me finish. I was afraid that if something happened to you, it would be my fault for not forcing you to live somewhere safer. But I was also afraid that if I spent more time with you, I'd have to confront how little effort I'd been making to really know you." Her honesty was painful but necessary, and I could see the courage it took for her to say these things. "I've spent my whole adult life building walls," she continued, "around my emotions, my relationships, my vulnerability. It's made me successful professionally, but it's also made me lonely, isolated." "You don't have to live that way," I said. "I'm starting to understand that. Watching you here, seeing how you've opened yourself to new experiences and new relationships, it makes me realize how much I've been missing." "It's never too late to choose differently," I told her. "Is it too late for us? For our relationship?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of misunderstanding and missed connections. But looking at my daughter, really seeing her perhaps for the first time, I realized that the woman sitting across from me was finally ready to be known. "No," I said firmly. "It's not too late, but it means we both have to be willing to let go of who we used to be and discover who we can be together." Charlotte's visit stretched from 5 days to a week to 10 days. She called her office to extend her vacation, claiming she was having breakthrough conversations with important clients. Which, in a way, was true. On her last day, she made a confession that stunned me. "I want to make some changes in my life," she said as we walked along the Seine in the pale winter sunshine. "Big changes." "What kind of changes?" "I want to take a sabbatical from my law practice. maybe a year, maybe longer. I want to travel, maybe do some volunteer work with organizations that help women start over after divorce or domestic violence. That sounds wonderful, I said, meaning it completely. I also want to try therapy. Real therapy, not just stress management techniques. I want to understand why I've been so afraid of connection, so controlling about everything. I'm proud of you for recognizing those patterns, I told her. And I want to ask you something. What's that? Would you be open to doing some sessions together? Mother-daughter therapy, I mean. I think we have a lot to work through, but I'd like to try to build something real between us. The request surprised me with its maturity and hopefulness. I would be very open to that. Good, she said with visible relief. Because I don't want to lose any more time pretending we're closer than we are when we could be working toward actually being close. Charlotte left Paris with plans to return in 6 months, after she'd had time to arrange her sabbatical and find a therapist who specialized in family relationships. She also left with a different understanding of who I was and what I was capable of. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, she said at the airport. Really see you, I mean. We see each other now, I replied. That's what matters. Spring arrived in Paris like a gentle revolution, transforming the city from winter's elegant restraint to an explosion of green and gold and impossible blue skies. The courtyard garden outside my window burst into bloom, and the cafe terraces reopened to sidewalk life. I marked my 6-month anniversary of arriving in Paris by taking myself to dinner at the restaurant where I'd had my first meal as a Parisian resident. The same waiter who had been patient with my halting French now greeted me like an old friend, asking about my family, my writing, my plans for the summer. The transformation in our relationship seemed to mirror my own transformation over these months. My book was taking shape, growing from scattered observations into something that felt significant and potentially helpful to other women facing similar crossroads. My writing group had become enthusiastic supporters of the project, offering feedback and encouragement as I worked through memories and insights. Most importantly, I had become someone I genuinely liked. Not the dutiful version of myself that I'd performed for decades, but the authentic Eleanor who had dreams and opinions and desires that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. Marcus and Linda visited again in April, this time with their children. Watching my grandchildren experience Paris for the first time reminded me of my own sense of wonder during those early weeks. But more than that, I loved seeing Marcus and Linda as a couple who had done the hard work of rebuilding their relationship on more honest foundations. You've inspired us to be braver, Linda told me over dinner at a family-friendly bistro near my apartment. About what we want, about what we're willing to change to get it. Quote, "All I did was choose myself for once," I said. Exactly. And that gave us permission to choose ourselves too, instead of just accepting whatever circumstances we'd settled for. My phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Therapy is going well. Can't wait to see you again soon. Love you, Mom. I smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that awful morning when my children had announced their plans to ship me off to a nursing home. They'd seen an old woman who was becoming inconvenient and had decided the solution was to warehouse me somewhere safe and manageable. They'd had no idea that the woman they were trying to contain was just beginning to understand her own power. The money they'd assumed would be their inheritance had bought me something far more valuable than financial security. It had bought me the freedom to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be who everyone else needed me to be. As summer approached, I made plans that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. A trip to Provence with Celeste to paint landscapes and visit art studios. A writing retreat in Normandy, where I would work on my book surrounded by other authors. A visit from my old friend Margaret, who had finally accepted my invitation to come see what all the fuss was about. But perhaps most exciting was the plan taking shape for the fall. Charlotte would be coming for an extended visit, taking a month to explore Europe and continue our work on rebuilding our relationship. Marcus and Linda were finalizing arrangements for their sabbatical year, with plans to spend several months in Paris so we could enjoy being a family in a new context. Next year at this time, we'll all be different people, Marcus said during our last video call before his European move. We already are different people, I replied. We're just becoming more ourselves. The woman who had sat in her Virginia living room accepting her children's plans for her future was gone. In her place was someone braver, more curious, more generous with herself and others. Someone who understood that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that family relationships work best when everyone involved is living authentically, and that starting over is not a consolation prize for getting older, but a privilege available to anyone courageous enough to claim it. I was 74 years old, and I had never been happier, not because my life was perfect, but because it was finally, completely mine. Every morning when I woke in my Parisian apartment, I looked at Catherine's painting of the woman with arms outstretched to the sea, and I remembered that moment of choice that had brought me here. The moment when I decided to stop accepting other people's vision of my limitations and start creating my own vision of possibility. The college funds my children had expected to inherit had bought me something they never could have imagined: the chance to discover that the story of Eleanor Whitman was far from over. In fact, it was just reaching its most interesting chapters. The autumn that followed marked my first full year in Paris, and with it came a profound sense of belonging I hadn't anticipated. The city had seen me through all 4 seasons now, and I had seen it transform from the golden warmth of my arrival through winter's elegant severity, spring's gentle awakening, and summer's abundant joy. Each season had taught me something different about resilience, beauty, and the art of paying attention to the world around me. My French had evolved from careful phrases to genuine fluency, complete with the subtle humor and cultural references that marked true integration. I found myself thinking in French sometimes, dreaming in a mixture of both languages, and most tellingly, feeling equally comfortable expressing complex emotions in either tongue. Language, I was discovering, was not just about communication, but about identity. Speaking French had given me access to a different version of myself, one who was perhaps more direct, more appreciative of beauty, more willing to engage in philosophical discussions with strangers. The writing project that had begun as scattered observations had grown into something I hardly dared to call a book, though that's clearly what it was becoming. Working with Henri from the writing group, I had structured my experiences into a narrative that explored not just my personal transformation, but the broader questions about aging, family dynamics, and the courage required to live authentically in a culture that often prefers older women to be invisible. You are writing something important, Henri told me during one of our monthly meetings. Not just your story, but the story of many women who believe it is too late for them to choose differently. The manuscript had reached nearly 200 pages, and I had begun to research publishers who might be interested in memoirs about late-life reinvention. Several members of my writing group had connections in the publishing world, and the consensus seemed to be that there was a growing market for stories about women who refused to accept society's limitations on their possibilities. More importantly, the act of writing had helped me understand my own journey with greater clarity. Putting words to experiences had a way of revealing patterns and insights that remained hidden when those experiences lived only in memory. I could see now how many small compromises over the decades had gradually eroded my sense of self. How easy it had been to confuse love with self-sacrifice. How completely I had internalized the message that my needs mattered less than everyone else's comfort. But I could also see the threads of strength that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The same determination that had gotten me through Harold's death, through single parenthood, through building a career while managing a household, had ultimately given me the courage to walk away from a life that no longer served me. Catherine Dubois had become not just a friend but something approaching a mentor in the art of creative living. Through her, I had met an entire community of artists, writers, and creative entrepreneurs who had chosen to prioritize meaning over security, beauty over convenience, authentic expression over social approval. Many of them were women my age or older who had made significant life changes after decades of living according to other people's expectations. We are the generation that was told to be grateful for whatever scraps of autonomy we were offered, Catherine said during one of our painting sessions in her studio. But gratitude and acceptance are not the same thing. We can be grateful for what we have, while still insisting on what we deserve. I had taken up watercolor painting with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a long dormant talent. My attempts were still amateur by any objective standard, but they brought me a kind of meditative joy I hadn't experienced since childhood. There was something profoundly satisfying about watching colors blend and flow, about trying to capture the quality of light on water, or the way shadows fell across ancient stone buildings. More than technique, painting had taught me about patience and process, about the beauty of imperfection and the value of experimenting without attachment to outcomes, about the difference between creating something to please others and creating something because the act of creation itself was pleasing. My social circle had expanded in ways that would have seemed impossible during my isolated final years in Virginia. Through Celeste, I had met other retired professors and cultural enthusiasts who gathered regularly for lectures, museum visits, and literary discussions. Through Catherine, I had connected with artists and creative types who brought a different kind of energy to my life. Through my French classes and conversation group, I had found an international community of fellow adventurers who understood the particular courage required to rebuild one's life in a foreign language. Most surprisingly, I had also connected with other American expatriates, many of whom had made similar late-in-life moves to Paris. There was Janet, a former corporate executive who had sold everything to open a small bookshop specializing in English language literature. There was Patricia, a retired nurse who was studying art history at the Sorbonne. There was Margaret, not my friend from Virginia, but another Margaret, who had left her grown children in California to pursue a master's degree in French literature at age 68. "We're part of a movement," this Margaret told me over coffee one afternoon. "Women who refuse to accept that our interesting years are behind us. We're proving that reinvention is not just for the young." Through these women, I learned that my story was not unique, though my particular circumstances were. There were increasing numbers of older women choosing dramatic life changes over quiet resignation. Some moved to foreign countries, others returned to school, still others started businesses or pursued artistic careers they had deferred for decades while caring for families. The common thread was not rebellion for its own sake, but a deep recognition that life was finite and precious, that time spent living according to other people's limitations was time that could never be recovered. My relationship with my children continued to evolve in ways that surprised all of us. Marcus and Linda's European sabbatical had begun in September, and they were currently settled in London while Linda pursued her graduate coursework, and Marcus worked remotely for his company. They planned to spend December and January in Paris, giving us extended time together as a family. But this would be a different kind of family gathering than any we had experienced before. Instead of me hosting and managing everyone else's comfort, we would be meeting as adults with our own independent lives and perspectives. The power dynamic that had defined our relationships for decades had shifted, and we were all still learning how to navigate this new terrain. Charlotte's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all. Her sabbatical from law practice had turned into a complete career pivot. She was now working with a nonprofit organization that helped women escape domestic violence, using her legal skills in service of something she found genuinely meaningful, rather than merely profitable. "I never realized how empty my life had become," she told me during one of our weekly video calls. "I was successful by every external measure, but I felt hollow inside. Watching you choose authenticity over security gave me permission to examine my own choices." Her therapy had been revelatory, helping her understand how her need for control had been rooted in fear, and how that fear had prevented her from forming genuine connections with anyone, including her own mother. She was planning to spend the entire month of January with me in Paris, the longest period we had spent together since she was a child. "I want to understand who you really are when you're not trying to take care of everyone else," she had said during our last conversation. "And I want you to get to know who I am when I'm not trying to manage every situation." The prospect both thrilled and terrified me. We had made significant progress in our relationship, but there was still so much history to navigate, so many patterns to unlearn. I was hopeful but realistic about the work that lay ahead. My daily routines had settled into rhythms that felt both sustainable and nourishing. Morning writing sessions with coffee and classical music. Afternoon walks through different neighborhoods, each one revealing new details about Parisian life and culture. Evening meals either prepared in my own kitchen with ingredients from the local market or shared with friends at restaurants that had become part of my extended social network. I had also begun volunteering at a local literacy program, teaching English to immigrants and refugees who were building new lives in France. The work was deeply satisfying, allowing me to use my teaching skills in service of people who understood the courage required to start over in a foreign culture. Madam Eleanor, you understand us, said Fatima, a young woman from Syria who was working to improve her English so she could pursue nursing certification in France. You know what it feels like to leave everything behind and try to build something new. Through this work, I gained perspective on my own privilege and choices. While my decision to move to Paris had been voluntary and financially comfortable, many of the students I worked with had left their home countries under desperate circumstances, carrying nothing but hope and determination. Their resilience and optimism, in the face of genuine hardship, put my own challenges in perspective and reminded me daily of how fortunate I was to have the resources to pursue happiness. The approaching holiday season brought both anticipation and reflection. This would be my first Christmas away from Virginia, my first holiday season as a woman living entirely according to her own priorities and preferences. I had been invited to spend Christmas Day with Celeste and her family, an offer I accepted with gratitude and excitement. But I had also decided to host my own small gathering on Christmas Eve, inviting the collection of friends who had become my chosen family in Paris. Catherine would come, along with several members of my writing group, some of my fellow English teachers from the literacy program, and Margaret from my American expatriate circle. Planning this dinner party felt significant in ways I was still trying to understand. In Virginia, holiday entertaining had always been about meeting other people's expectations, creating perfect presentations, managing everyone else's dietary restrictions and family dynamics. This gathering would be different. I was inviting people I genuinely enjoyed, planning a menu based on foods I wanted to share, creating an atmosphere that reflected my own aesthetic and values. The guest list itself told the story of my transformation. A year ago, my social circle had consisted primarily of people I knew through obligation, proximity, or historical accident. Now I was surrounded by individuals I had chosen based on shared interests, compatible values, and genuine affection. As I planned the menu and prepared my apartment for guests, I realized I was creating new traditions, rather than simply modifying old ones. The woman who had spent decades trying to recreate her mother's holiday celebrations, trying to meet her children's expectations, trying to maintain traditions that no longer served anyone, was gone. In her place was someone confident enough to define celebration in her own terms. The dinner party, when it happened, was everything I had hoped it would be and more. My apartment filled with laughter, animated conversation in multiple languages, and the kind of warmth that comes from people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Catherine brought paintings she had created as gifts for everyone. Henri shared stories from his journalism career that had us all mesmerized. Margaret contributed wine from a small vineyard she had discovered during a recent trip to Burgundy. Most importantly, I found myself relaxed and present in a way I had never managed during my Virginia entertaining. Instead of constantly monitoring everyone's satisfaction and adjusting my behavior to ensure their comfort, I was simply enjoying the pleasure of sharing good food and conversation with people I cared about. "This is how it should be," Celeste whispered to me as we cleared plates between courses. Celebration that comes from joy, not obligation. As midnight approached and my guests began to make their way home through the quiet Paris streets, I stood on my balcony looking out at the courtyard garden, where snow had begun to fall again. The city was settling into the peaceful hush that came with Christmas Eve, and I felt a contentment so complete it was almost physical. This time last year, I had been in my Virginia living room, wrapped in the familiar melancholy that had come to characterize my holiday seasons, surrounded by decorations that held more obligation than joy, preparing for gatherings that felt more like performance than celebration, wondering how, Many more years I would go through these motions before someone decided I was too much trouble to include. Now I was standing in my Parisian apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life I had created from nothing but courage and curiosity, preparing to spend Christmas Day with people who valued my company for who I was rather than what I could provide. The transformation still amazed me sometimes. Not just the external changes, though those were dramatic enough, but the internal shift, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to curiosity, from resignation to possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Thank you for showing us all how to be brave." Another from Charlotte. "Can't wait to see you next month. Love you so much." As I prepared for bed in my beautiful bedroom with its tall windows and elegant furnishings, I thought about the gifts I had given myself over the past year. The gift of solitude that was chosen rather than imposed. The gift of friendships based on mutual interest rather than mutual obligation. The gift of days structured around curiosity and pleasure rather than duty and maintenance. But perhaps the greatest gift was the discovery that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. That authenticity was not a luxury for the young, but a necessity for anyone who wanted to live fully. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear. I had been 73 when I decided to stop accepting other people's limitations on my possibilities. I was now 74 and just beginning to understand what I was capable of when fear no longer governed my choices. The book I was writing would eventually be published, finding its way to women around the world who were struggling with similar questions about aging, family, and the courage required to choose authenticity over security. Letters would arrive from readers who had made their own dramatic life changes after reading about mine, proving that stories of transformation had the power to inspire transformation. Charlotte would complete her own metamorphosis, eventually moving to Paris herself to work with international human rights organizations, building a relationship with me based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than duty and guilt. Marcus and Linda would extend their European sabbatical into a permanent relocation, settling in London but spending extended periods in Paris, creating the kind of close but independent family relationship I had always hoped for but never known how to achieve. But those future developments were still unknown as I settled into sleep on my first Christmas Eve in Paris. What I knew was that I had chosen myself, finally and completely, and that choice had opened up possibilities I could never have imagined while I was still trying to be the person everyone else needed me to be. The college funds my children had expected to inherit had purchased something far more valuable than they could have understood. The freedom to discover that Eleanor Whitman's story was far from over, that the most interesting chapters were yet to be written, and that starting over was not a consolation prize for getting older but a privilege available to anyone brave enough to claim it. As I drifted off to sleep in my Parisian apartment, snow falling softly outside my windows, I smiled at the thought of all the women who might be inspired to write their own stories of transformation, who might discover that it was never too late to choose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, possibility over resignation. The woman who had been auctioned off for $8 at her son's wedding was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than the love and respect she deserved. Someone who had learned that the most radical act of self-love was sometimes simply refusing to live a smaller life than the one you dreamed of. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.